This is episode 657 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, to paraphrase the great Charles Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think that describes a New Mexican's experience, at least if you're on the broadly speaking right of the political spectrum like you and I. Pretty happy with the way things went nationally. Pretty disappointed with the way things went right here in New Mexico.
Yes, New Mexico definitely does now stick out as a very, very, very blue state in terms of everything. So even the states surrounding us that have a few representatives, like Colorado, some of those are have Republicans, but no Republicans in New Mexico.
Yeah, if you want to see a really wild map, look at the U.S. House of Representatives map, kind of just the superimposed U.S. Map, and every state, all throughout the broad span of our country, except for New England, uh, even California, large geographical tracts. Now, yeah, California has 54 members of the Congress, and uh, most of them are Democrats. Although there's some inroads made in this election by Republicans in California. You just look at this map, and what sticks out literally is New Mexico right there in all of its blue glory. All three of our members of Congress formulating the entirety of New Mexico. So outside of New England, and that includes New Hampshire, that includes Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut. Those states are all blue, but because they're small geographical size, they're not really impactful. In fact, New Mexico's way bigger than the entirety of New England. It really is obvious just how far to the left New Mexico is. So, um, not a lot to say about that, except for, well, we will be saying a lot about that later on in the show. So, but let's start with a little more positive. Well, actually, not even positive. Let's start with our predictions, and
Yes.
then we can talk about the pluses and minuses of what happened. So let's
I
let.
felt pretty good about mine from memory, but sometimes when you look back at what was written down, it wasn't as good. So I'm anxious to hear.
So the first is that we both were accurate in our prediction that Donald Trump would win. Uh, both of us predicted no popular vote for Trump. So that was obviously incorrect. Trump will win the popular vote. We were both correct in predicting Martin Heinrich would win here in New Mexico. I had a slightly bigger advantage for the Republicans, which wasn't quite big enough. I believe that they will have 53 at the end of the day.
Right.
I said 52. You said 51. We both went out on a bit of a limb and were more maybe hopeful than acting with our hearts, or hearts versus our heads, in terms of Yvette Harrell. She, of course, lost and lost pretty handily, as frankly most of the polls indicated. That Trump differential, where he seems to have the polls kind of turned against him in general. They always underestimate that Trump vote by a little bit, just the margins. Does not seem to work for anybody else, and certainly didn't work for Yvette Harrell. Uh, I had a 10 vote advantage for the Republicans in the House. By the end of the day, you had six.
Yeah.
I believe you will be closer to that, although we don't know the exact extent of the Republican majority in the House.
Yes, there are places in this great country that don't count votes very quickly. California, Arizona, so there's a lot that are still out there. But I think the odds of the Republicans having a majority in the House are virtually 100% at this point, and some have even called it to that. So,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah, there have been outlets that have said officially, uh, whether it's officially or not, the Republicans will have a majority, a slight majority, and that'll have some impacts that really it's obviously important. The House being the more small d Democratic, the much larger body than the Senate, is generally easier to get a firm majority. It'll be much easier when you have the presidency, the Senate, and then whatever number in the House. The idea of Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Lauren Boebert, and some of these
Hmm.
other characters, shall we say, in the House being willing to stand up, not to Mike Johnson in the House, the Speaker, but the entire weight of the Republican leadership across this country. It's a little less likely that they'll be willing to do that. Now we get to where we were vastly too optimistic, Wally. I predicted 5 seats being picked up in the New Mexico House of Representatives. That wound up being just 1, and 2 seats in the New Mexico Senate, also 1. You were 3 in the House, 1 in the Senate, so kudos on that. I would say that we both get a gentleman's B in terms of
Yeah.
our, some of these were pretty obvious. I think obviously the most tricky pick that we made was Trump winning the overall electoral college. So that was one that when I was sitting there with my fellow panelists on KUNM or KSFR,
Did they start to increasingly scowl at you, Paul, as the night went forward, or were
they
they
they were
polite to you?
they were generally very nice. I always enjoy talking to Fred Nathan. He plays up his progressive bona fides a little bit around the progressives in Santa Fe, but uh, he was okay. He stressed his daughters were the ones who were going to be upset. Martha Burke, I believe she was the head of the National Organization for Women, and she most famously was the first female member of Augusta National
Uh
way
huh.
back in the 90s. She was also on it, and some other kind of local voice who ultimately kind of cut his teeth in Vermont politics. So really used to the right wing politics there, but he says sarcastically. So all 3 of those folks picked uh, Harris as the likely winner of the election, and I was the only one to pick Donald J. Trump. And before we move on to some of the impacts, Harris was just. I don't know that the Democrats had a path to victory. I think maybe Shapiro in Pennsylvania picks up a few votes, maybe even can help them win Pennsylvania. But uh, I Harris was a terrible candidate. Joe Biden's obviously not mentally fit. I don't know that either of those two, or for that matter, really anybody on the Democratic side, could have won this race. I think the the issues, and one of the glorious things about this election is that it showed that issues and policies still do matter. Yes, abortions out there, it's an important issue, but it wasn't, at least nationally, the driving force in this election. It was actual pocketbook issues, immigration, and other important things that people want to see out of their national government.
Yeah, Paul, and it is interesting to me. I don't think that Harris was a good candidate, but here's I think there's a way more to it than this, but I think this encapsulated the problem she had as a candidate. Is they asked her what she would do differently than Biden, and she did not have an answer. Now, I think she probably had an answer in her mind, but she was in that position where she felt like if she were to give a true answer to get any kind of moderates and maybe left leaning Republicans on her side, it would have eroded her base. And then from there, just the fact that she's not a good speaker, and you get her away from the teleprompter and get her going on something like a podcast. Although the podcast she did, it didn't hurt her, but it was some pretty fluffy stuff. Whereas, Trump, love him or hate him, he'll sit there and talk. He'll talk in an open forum, unscripted and without any limits on what questions are for hour after hour. And so that was certainly a different contrast between candidates. And then when it came down to the issues, I think in the areas that are away from the very progressive cities, there was a whole lot going out there in flyover country, as they call it, that the pollsters really did miss. And this is not the first time. It won't be the last. And polling is increasingly difficult, and it gets way more attention than it should. But I don't think that will change. And then if there's a group I think that lost as much as the Dems lost the presidency, I think the fact that the mainstream media, the traditional media, who was all in for Biden and then all in for Harris, and the donors who gave $1 billion to the Harris campaign, between the media and those donors, they were a huge loser in this because people just frankly ignored them, or at least more ignored them than paid attention to them. And I think they may have a very tough time recovering from that. The trend has been in that direction in fits and starts, but that was profound for them to be that much in and that out of touch with the electorate, and the fact that there might be more than one opinion out there in the United States.
Yeah, I hesitate to point to one specific moment that kind of sealed the deal for Harris to be defeated. But ironically, if I had to pick one, it would be The View, which is kind of an odd choice because trust me, hopefully, if you listen or watch this, you don't watch The View on a regular basis because we try to be fairly high. We're not using SAT words around here. We're not trying to emphasize eight syllable words, but The View is kind of the bottom feeders of political discourse in this country. But they did have Kamala Harris on at one point and asked her the most straightforward of straightforward questions. Would you have done anything differently from Joe Biden were you the president of the United States? And she did not say anything. She said no, essentially. I just am baffled by that response. Obviously, the lower hanging fruit would be the Afghanistan pullout and the disaster that was. Uh, she could have even made a fumbling attempt to say, I wouldn't have spent so much money. I would have done something to limit inflation, even if it wouldn't have actually happened.
Right.
Of course, the one that I would have liked, and I think would have, if I was honestly her advisor, I would have said, talk about the liquefied natural gas exports, and you can portray your response in the form of a triple good thing, in a sense that we can increase exports, not decrease them, get Asian nations to see us as a reliable source of LNG so they don't have to build as many coal plants, push back against the Russians by making the Germans and other Europeans less dependent on Russia, and of course, bring jobs and economic prosperity and show beyond the kind of, half-ass
Yeah.
responses on fracking, whatever her views on fracking. I don't think she gave anybody who was pro fracking or is pro fracking enough reason to say, oh, yeah, Kamala Harris is clearly pro fracking. But she also seems to have upset, obviously, some number of environmentalists who probably still voted for her, but wouldn't have seen her as their standard bearer. So, any thoughts on that, Wally?
Well, Paul, when you were talking, you said something about her advisors, and she went through a ton of communication directors when she was vice president, and for whatever reason, look at the I'll throw three presidents out there that I think were relatively good communicators. And believe me, two out of the three were not my favorite of all time, but Obama, Clinton, Reagan. Um, very different styles, and you could disagree with the policies, but they would absolutely be able to get out there and discuss what they thought and what they were for and what they thought was good for the country. And Harris was just unable to do that. And I don't know to the fact that she was never really able to do that very well during her vice presidency. Uh, it certainly carried over. And so I don't know, is one of those, is she unable, unwilling? Is she undisciplined? There's an un there that we may never know the answer to the story. But at the end of the day, I don't think it was the messaging that was the issue. It was the fact that the performance of the Biden administration for the people that ended up voting for Trump was so bad. And if she wasn't going to do something to distance herself from that, and as you said, she did not. She fumbled it, and if you can't win uh, the progressives over on the View, there's nowhere you can do it. And so I'm sure that was enough for her staunchest supporters, but she didn't move any voters that way, and a lot of undecideds, I think, went the other way. So, uh, but you can, and I do hear this about messaging for different political organizations. Oh, our messaging isn't good. It's like, no, your policies are bad,
Right.
and they're not being well implemented, and they're a disaster. And if you don't change them, you can have the best messaging in the world. It's not going to help you.
You're absolutely right. Couple of upshots here. One critical thing, and one of the reasons that it was very easy to vote for Trump, regardless of other potential disagreements, is the Supreme Court. Uh, I fully expect that Thomas and Alito will take the time to retire at some point during Trump's term. Uh, of course, Thomas is probably my favorite Supreme Court justice, certainly of my lifetime, and one of the most impactful, certainly in American history, or at least recent American history. So, Thomas and Alito want to see, I'm sure, their ideological compatriots continue the fight on the judiciary, and they are getting up there, and this is a great opportunity to take retirement. So we'll see if that happens. Of course, the left is very adamant that Justice Sotomayor, leave right now.
Yeah, she needs a food tester for the rest of 2024. They are after her. And
Yeah,
she said, I've read reports that she said, no, I'm not going anywhere. But okay, Paul, that maybe is a little difference, is the Dems cannot help themselves. They just get out there and they're in panic mode. And that's a good example.
yeah. So we will see if Sotomayor is, healthy enough. I know she's got some health related issues, and if she makes it through the 4 years, that'll be something to definitely watch. Uh, you know, it'll be interesting. I mean, if she's going to retire and you're going to have the presidents nominate a replacement who is going to have the kind of more left wing judicial philosophy, uh, he needs to do it right now. He needed to do it yesterday, quite honestly. So, uh, obviously, there's limited time left, and that would very much be a huge lift for the Supreme Court. I'm not, or for the Congress, for the Senate. I'm not saying it won't get done. I'm just saying it's something that needs to be done ASAP. So,
Time is of the essence.
yeah. Other issues, of course, energy being here in New Mexico. Uh, on the good side, Trump is pro energy. A lot of the attacks against the industry will cease. I think the LNG issues, one that will be addressed. Hopefully, the electric vehicle mandates are another. But just in general, pro permitting, pro energy exploitation and development. That could have positive impacts in New Mexico. But if Trump does what he says he wants to do, which involves reducing the price of gas in half, or give or
Mhm.
take, uh, driving prices down, that could redound negatively to the state of New Mexico. Of course, it is worth noting this is a production driven boom. New Mexico has a lot of money that we're sitting on, but that could impact jobs and kind of economic activity in southeast New Mexico in some ways, in a negative sense. So that's one that I'm very interested to watch that develop.
Yeah, and then Paul, there are a lot of policies that came out of the Infrastructure Act and the oh my goodness, I almost have a hard time saying it, the Inflation Reduction Act, because it actually was not, it did nothing to reduce inflation, but there is a lot of money in those for various things that, interestingly, even on the environmental kind of carbon reduction side, have been very slow to be implemented. And so, it's interesting to see whether, and those are energy related as well, although it's low carbon, whether those will could actually speed up under a Trump administration again towards reliable energy. We'll see what happens. There's a lot that we don't know, and it'll be very interesting to see, who the Department of Energy, who will lead that up, and then what their approach will be to a lot of the things that were passed during the Biden administration.
Yeah, and of course, energy, important, but also interior is an important entity in terms of who heads that up and how energy development issues go in Washington. There's at least rumors. Uh, I have no reason to believe or disbelieve them, but uh, that possibly Yvette Harrell could be tabbed for that. I don't know. Uh, Certainly, anybody besides Deb Holland, I would be happy to have there, but we'll just see how that shakes out. Uh, and just that's going to be very interesting to watch. Of course, that's one of several other areas, most notably spending, and you know Trump in his first 4 years proved himself to be much less vindictive in terms of actual vindictiveness. He talked a lot,
Yeah.
said lock up Hillary and this, that, and the other. I would be here for, if to use the phrase the kids used, I would be interested to watch whether he has more vindictiveness and also takes on the spending situation in a more aggressive way. Cutting spending, draining the swamp, and being vindictive can all fit nicely together. For example, right here in New Mexico, uh, and I have no insider information on this, but we did just see, literally less than 2 weeks ago, as our governor, our lands commissioner, and our mayor all essentially tag teamed in a basic attempt to not allow Trump to do a campaign rally here. Uh, Now that Trump is the president, he's got a firm majority in both houses. Uh, who's to say that New Mexico needs two national labs? Or who's to say that cities that are considered sanctuary cities get the same funding as those that are not? I do think that there is room for what I would consider to be both good policy and vindictiveness and spending cuts all wrapped in one. I'm not saying it'll happen, but uh, it for a state that is as dependent on the federal government as it is, it never ceases to amaze me how Democrats in this state tend to act like they are the captains of their own ship. They are the chosen ones. They have no vulnerabilities. We have massive vulnerabilities as a state, and if Trump chose to come after them, he has massive opportunities to do that and achieve goals throughout his campaign and out his administration.
Well, and I do think, Paul, as I kind of just look back on it, I think the D's, when they're in power, always, not always, in recent memory, the past 10 to 20 years, when they get a Democrat in, they always they always act like they think that there will never be a Republican president or a administration or a Republican majority in the House and the Senate again, and they go about their business. And you don't have to look back too far. There's been H.W. Bush, G.W. Bush, double dose of Trump now, and there have been Democrats, but it does swing back and forth. And from a politics point of view, that view might be really help you with your base, but from the point of view of the state and what we're doing, we'll see. Does it create a problem or does it not?
Yeah, on that note, I found a little nugget. And this is the best thing about social medias, aside from some of the memes and whatnot, but specifically on X. And Pramila Jayapal, a radical left wing congresswoman, kind of an AOC type, she was asked recently, post election, uh, how do you square your support for axing the filibuster when it will now likely be what protects some of Biden's key investments? Jayapal, am I championing getting rid of the filibuster now when the GOP has the trifecta? No. But had we had the trifecta, I would have been. Uh, and that drew a response from Kirsten Sinema, former Arizona congresswoman, who a Democrat but more moderate and opposed eliminating the filibuster, and said, "You don't say." And I do that really does
Yeah.
hit
I was
home.
for it before I was against it, Paul.
And of course, famously, Tom Udall, right here in New Mexico, the U.S. Senator, he was one of the ringleaders, along with Harry Reid, in eliminating the filibuster for judicial nominees.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm not. Tom Udall is definitely smarter than the average Democrat these days, but good grief, he had to know that at some point the Republicans were going to use this to their advantage, and sure enough, that's exactly what has happened. So,
Yeah, but that was back to my point about
that
do they really believe
yes,
that? Do they
yeah.
they're like, "Oh no, this is it. No more Republicans will ever be in charge." And so, Paul, I will say right here right now that I think in my lifetime there may be another Democrat president of the United States. I know that's a bold statement, and I might have to live a few years to see that come true. But the history of the United States is we've floated back and forth between who's in charge.
Yeah, well, hopefully you live a good long life, and if you do that, you will definitely see Democrats and Republicans elected to the nation's highest office. Now, before we get down to the legislature in New Mexico, from a policy perspective, I'm going to take a stab at some political maneuvering here, that has been set in motion by this election. So, I have heard on good authority that Martin Heinrich will stay put in the U.S. Senate. That will keep, of course, Michelle Lujan Grisham is going to stay put for 2 years.
Because you heard it here first. The Trump administration will not appoint the governor to any position in the Trump
Yes,
cabinet or government. So
yes, that is the easiest prediction. Next to the sun will come up tomorrow. Uh, the rumor is that Deb Haaland, current Interior Secretary, will be, I don't know, that the field will be cleared for her, but the establishment of the Democratic Party has lined up to support Deb Haaland for governor. And
And Paul, if we've seen one thing, particularly with the presidency, but I think governors the same, the Democrats have shown a very much distaste for a very open democratic
absolutely,
process to select their leaders at the party level. Obviously, we have elections and the general election, but they like to anoint people, not elect them. And this is a potential. It hasn't happened yet, but I think there is a decent chance.
yes. And we'll see what happens with that decision or not decision. And obviously, the Republicans will have to come up with somebody for Governor, we have no idea. Personally, I have no idea who that will be. Uh, the other thing is that Ben Ray Lujan, his Senate seat will be up in 2 years. So uh, that might give Michelle Lujan Grisham her opportunity to go to the U.S. Senate. If Lujan, he's had his own health issues, including a stroke, so there's a reasonable chance that he may not return to Washington. Otherwise, MLG could be kind of the odd person out on the Democrat side. Of course, who the Republicans pick to try to run in CD2, I've got at least some thoughts on that I'm not going to divulge here. Governor, and we do have, first and foremost, next year, a mayoral campaign right here in the city of Albuquerque. Now, there could have potentially been implications relating to that. My belief is that if Sam Bregman, current DA, Democrat, were to decide to run for mayor, that he would clear the field of both Republicans and other Democrats, with the exception of the current mayor, Tim Keller, and that uh, he would probably kick kick Keller's butt. He would wipe the floor, in my estimation, partially due to broad support from Republicans and moderate Democrats. But uh, that's the next round of elections we'll have to contemplate here in the state of New Mexico. So, any thoughts on that? You think I'm full of it, Wally? You got any other ideas?
Well, I think your idea about the mayoral race is probably right. And as you were saying, that what cracks me up is the nonpartisan mayoral race, which everyone always it is nonpartisan. There's not a primary for the D's and the R's, but everyone always knows the candidate. And so I think that one is correct. I hadn't thought about Lujan and Senator Lujan and his health, but it's one of those. It depends on what people want to do. I do think a Senator Lujan and Deb Haaland Democratic primary for governor would be an interesting one to watch. But again, as we've said, maybe quote unquote clearing the field and backroom arm twisting uh, may take the better. But as you say, in a Washington situation that is the Trump administration, there are not any kind of get out of jail free seats for people to go with to get out of there. So we may see, heaven forbid, we may see primary, or we may see more than one candidate actually running for a few of these offices, including mayor of Albuquerque and governor of New Mexico.
Yeah, um, it'll be. We'll be watching all of this unfold. It's as we move to the state level. Uh, Bill Scher is the Senate Minority Leader. That was very much predicted. Scher is a great guy, been there quite a while. He is most known, if you know Bill Scher, if you watch the legislature, kind of just a little bit for his filibusters. And he doesn't do I'm going to put a card in here like they do in Washington. It's the Mr. Smith goes to Washington kind of filibuster where you're reading from the phone book. In Scher's case, providing arcane details about astronomy and the weather and other things. So great guy, somebody that can paper over a few of the differences that the Republicans have in the state Senate. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's one of those. The numbers were not necessarily horrible where the R's lost a ton more seats as they've been doing in election after election. But I do think that the progressive nature of the Senate and the House is going to definitely be felt this session. And so a lot of the candidates that won are not your grandparents' Democrats. They are the new progressive Democrats, some of which support policies that are very popular with the base, but not always popular with the broader electorate. But when they keep winning, there's been no real pushback on that. So that's the thing I'm going to be looking for. One of the things, the paid family medical leave, which went
Yep.
down. The odds of that being up there in a major way again is huge, and that's one of those, Paul. I studied that more than I cared to this last session, but there's a lot of things that are said about it, and the places that have that, people like it and people use it, and it costs way more than they always say, and so whatever percentage they're going to have the employer or the employee pay, it's always has to be higher than those initial estimates, or at least in the overwhelming majority of the cases, and also very, very expensive to administer from a government point of view. So, a lot of detail to say, watch out. That one I think will be introduced early on. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's not one of those that the skids are greased on, but we will see, because that's one that the progressives nationally, and make no mistake about it, these things that are brought up don't just they're not hatched here in New Mexico. These are national
Sure.
progressive legislative things, and I think that's one to watch early on, kind of as a the canary in the mine shaft, as a bellwether of how the session might go.
Yeah. In addition to that, and we'll have more detailed conversations later on about each of these issues, but we're broadly speaking priorities. Uh, we will hope for and push for tax reductions. I'm not expecting GRT reform, but maybe a cut in the GRT rate. I'm expecting that there will be hikes in taxes as well, not the least of which is the alcohol tax, but there's probably going to be some others discussed. The baby bonds plan, what will that look like, and trying to improve upon that. As you mentioned, paid family medical leave, setbacks for oil and gas, and of course, we will learn very quickly whether this governor is truly a hawk on crime issues or whether she was trying to get a victory on crime policy as a means of burnishing her credentials for the Harris administration. So uh, we'll we'll see how that all goes. But
And then what's the final one for me, Paul? Education. Are we going to just declare victory and go home, ignore it for another session, do something around the edges, all of the above? I don't know, but that's one of those where that is getting to be the elephant in the room, and not the Republican elephant, just a
I have
big old thing that's getting harder and harder to ignore.
I have zero faith that the education issue will be addressed in any substantive way
And
in
the
the
fact
state of
that
New
you
Mexico.
didn't mention it, Paul, shows that how much it's being talked about out there on either side of the aisle in New Mexico. Other than 4 day school week, that's the one issue that I think that has a little that gets a little bit of political interest. But other than that, doing better. Nah, we don't need
Yeah,
to worry about that.
that's tied up in the courts as well,
Yeah.
so unlikely that that will be addressed in the legislature one way or the other. Yeah, it's challenging. As a quick note, Catherine Cullen. Right now, we're assuming there's one seat pickups in both houses. There is a uh, recount under or that's going to be done in the Catherine Cullen. That's Jason Harper's old seat in Rio Rancho. She's got a very very narrow lead. Gabe Ramos won the Senate seat, so that's the pickup. Rebecca Dow on the House side won the new seat. But again, overall, our legislature is more progressive, is going to be more progressive at the start of the coming 60-day session than it was at the start of the last 30-day session, when all is said and done, because of the primaries and the fact that the Democrats keep getting rid of moderates in their own, primary races, and Republicans simply have not been able to make inroads. Broadly speaking, if you looked at all the races and you looked at the district performance, the Republicans won the seats that they were supposed to win, lost anything that they were 50-50 or not supposed to win. And there's got to be some. I'm not blaming the candidates. I don't even blame necessarily Steve Pierce, but I know that there's a lot of angst and animosity and concern about the future of the Republican Party. Uh, that won't be up for a vote for another 2 years, so far as I expect. I believe that's the way it'll work out. So I don't really have any ready-made options or thoughts for how this trend can be turned around. I do believe I will say this: the last time a Republican won the presidency in 2004 was George W. Bush. The Republican Party in that era was much more friendly towards the interventionist, neoconservative approach to politics. That doesn't mean that John McCain or Mitt Romney, who are more of that ilk, supported, got wins in New Mexico. But 2004, I mean, Bush, we'd gone into Iraq. Uh, he wasn't exactly brimming with popularity by early 2004. There just may be something about that kind of Republican that is more attractive to a defense and military industrial complex oriented state like New Mexico from an economic perspective. Or perhaps the electorate has just changed to the point where it's just going to be very, very hard to elect large numbers of Republicans for the foreseeable future. I don't know. These are questions that uh, uh, Brian Sandroff, if he was, and again, kudos to Sandroff for nailing the results of this election. Other pollsters struggled with that across the country, but Sandroff knows New Mexico and got it right again. Uh, but if he wanted to, if I had the resources, I would maybe try to do a poll to really get underneath the upper level and figure out what issues really could be used to rally more conservative free market candidates than the way New Mexico is governed. And I'm not sure if there's any. I'm not even sure how to attack that. I'm not sure that there's any ready-made hypotheses, let alone facts, to figure out that solution.
No, it is a tough one, and even compared to, and we've talked, and I've made this point before. Even compared to places like Colorado, which are very liberal, they do have some more conservative policy leanings because they don't have huge oil and gas, and they're not able to raise their income tax because of their taxpayer bill of rights. Where in New Mexico, we uh, we have the industry that we love to hate, oil and gas, providing all the money that could ever want to be spent in a rational way in a state of 2 million people. And so a lot of the policies that get implemented don't do anything to hurt the government. And so the government has plenty of money. The people aren't necessarily thriving. But when you hear how is New Mexico doing, it depends on who you talk to what that question means. To many, many people in New Mexico, and more than in all of our surrounding states, it means how is state government doing? They have money, so we're doing fine. But that's different than having good education, low crime, access to health care, the things that really, good jobs out of the public sector. Those are things that are very important. And so, yeah, right now it's tough. The answer to the question is who is the single highest elected official in New Mexico. It's either one of our minority state senators or we're back to the mayor of Rio Rancho. And so that is that right there is a pretty good indication.
You got it. Well, we'll be back to our usual, more policy oriented discussions, but I think it's important to set out a broad roadmap for where things are going to head in the next 4 years nationally and at least 2 years here at the state level. And we shall see. We'll be there every step of the way. Thanks for listening. to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.